The European Union is preparing to conclude a free trade agreement with India. Now, the two sides are set to sign off on the deal on Tuesday. Today, the EU's top two leaders, Commission President Ursula von der Leyen and Council President Antonio Costa, attended India's Republic Day parade as guests of Prime Minister Narendra Modi. Now, the deal comes just days after the European Union signed a free trade pact with the Mercosur countries in South America. Joining me now is Chietigj, a senior research fellow for South Asia at Chatham House. He focuses on India's foreign and security policy and its growing role in global geopolitics. Mr. Bajpaee, it's good to have you with us. This deal between the EU and India, it has been stalled for quite some time. So why do we see the deal moving forward now? What has changed?
Well, I think the elephant in the room is, of course, the Trump factor. Trump's actions, I think, have added urgency to getting this agreement over the line. It's signaled a continued commitment by both the European Union and India towards greater trade liberalization, as both face pressure from the Trump administration's aggressive use of tariffs as a tool of U.S. foreign policy. So in that context, I would say an EU-India trade deal shouldn't be looked at in isolation. It comes as both sides are essentially conducting trade negotiations with several key partners. We've seen the EU conclude a trade deal recently with the Mercosur countries. We've seen India conclude trade deals with the UK, with the EFTA countries, and with several other countries. So I think that there is this attempt by both sides to forge agreements with like-minded countries, given the pressure that the Trump administration is imposing on the international system.
I want to pick up on those other trade deals in just a moment. But first, I'd like for us maybe to compare these two partners, the EU and India, and just look at them in terms of population, in terms of GDP. If we compare them, we see that the EU is 5.8% of the world's population and 17.8% of global GDP. India, on the other hand, has almost 18% of the population global, but it just has 3.3% of global GDP. So if we look at those numbers, how can we say that this is a deal of equals when we've got, it looks like maybe the rich side of this is actually writing the rules here? Is that a fair assessment?
I would argue that the deal is equally important to both sides. One could argue that India is perhaps the bigger winner, given the pressure that it's facing from the Trump administration's tariffs. It's facing 50% tariffs. And given that the EU is its leading trade partner, while India is only the EU's 9th largest trading partner. Plus, in some ways, India is at an inherent disadvantage compared to some of the EU's other trade partners that have duty-free access to the EU market. Vietnam, for instance, already has a trade deal with the European Union. India also doesn't have access to the GSP trade concession, which other countries like Pakistan, Bangladesh, and Sri Lanka have. And that gives them preferential access to the EU market. But the EU will also be gaining, given the vast market that India offers, the fact that it's an engine of global growth, its demographic dividend, its status as the world's most populous country, the fact that it's the world's fastest growing major economy. There are nearly 6,000 European companies in India. So I think, and on top of that, India is, I would argue, is the more protectionist of the two between the European Union and India. So I think both sides do gain from this trade deal. And it's also about improving supply chain resilience, given India's large IT-educated workforce, strong digital ecosystem, and ambitions to emerge as a global manufacturing hub. It offers a means by which the EU can potentially reduce its dependence and exposure to China.
At the World Economic Forum last week, leaders warned that the global order is fragmenting now into blocks. Is this deal, do you think that it's really so much about trade, or is it more about power politics?
Yeah, again, I would say that the India-EU relationship and the trade deal itself are not a response to the Trump administration's actions. It's not purely a response to recent developments that we've seen, but I think it has added urgency to some of these interactions. As the U.S. is increasingly challenging the rules-based international order, the EU and India are seeking to preserve their own strategic autonomy in a world of renewed great power competition and assertiveness. And both sides are essentially seeking to, again, conclude deals with like-minded countries. So I think the symbolism of the deal matters as much as, if not more, in some ways, than the economic substance. It signals this emergence of an increasingly multidimensional and maturing relationship between Brussels and New Delhi, and builds on other prior achievements. The Trade and Technology Council between India and the EU, which was established in 2023, a new strategic agenda, which was endorsed last October. So I think it is this development of an increasingly multidimensional relationship between Brussels and New Delhi.
How much would you say of a red line is India's relationship with Russia for Europe? I mean, obviously, there's another elephant in the room, and that is the war in Ukraine and the fact that India continues to buy Russian oil.
Yeah, so I think European countries, to some degree, have been understanding of India's strategic compulsions, its dependence on Russian military hardware. Over 50% of India's in-service military platforms are of Russian origin. Also, India's energy-hungry and price-sensitive economy, which accounts for its heavy dependence on discounted Russian crude. But I think as the war has dragged on, scrutiny of the India-Russia relationship has grown. We saw the EU impose sanctions on an Indian entity for the first time in its 13th sanctions package on Russia back in 2024. And this came amid reports that India has emerged as the second largest provider of restricted critical technologies to Russia after China. So I think that scrutiny will continue, particularly if New Delhi's actions are seen to be empowering Moscow and thus prolonging the conflict in Ukraine. And I think this is a key fault line in the relationship. I think that India has sought to manage it to some degree by the statements that it's made. Prime Minister Modi has stated that he stands on the side of peace, that India stands on the side of peace. We saw Prime Minister Modi visiting Ukraine in August 2024, a month after visiting Russia. So it has tried to maintain this more balanced foreign policy. But frankly, it is a key fault line in the India-EU relationship.
Mr. Bajpaee, unfortunately, we're out of time. We appreciate your time tonight and your insights and analysis on this. We will continue to follow the story of the trade relationship between Europe and India. Thank you. And our coverage continues now with Garima Mohan. She's a senior fellow at the German Marshall Fund, focusing on security and diplomatic ties between India and the European Union. Garima, it's good to have you with us. We just heard there that the trade deal, it may not be the best deal, but it's the biggest deal. How do both sides, how do they profit then from this agreement?
So definitely it is a massive deal, and the EU and India are two major blocs comprising of 2 billion people and a quarter of the world's GDP. So any sort of trade deal between the two was always supposed to be huge and historic. But this one in particular, as your report stated, would really benefit the EU's automobile sector, which is currently struggling from competition with China as well as the United States. Similarly, for wines, we'll see reductions in tariffs. In fact, we've been told that 90% of the trade between the EU and India will see tariff reductions. For India, the EU is its largest trading partner and second largest export market. So huge wins expected for Indian industry across the board as well.
Do you expect any last-minute changes or surprises before the signing of this treaty takes place tomorrow on Tuesday?
Both sides and their political leaders actually seem fairly confident. India's Commerce Minister Piyush Goyal, as well as the EU Commission President von der Leyen, have both hailed it as the mother of all deals. So it seems like the two sides are fairly confident that an agreement has finally been reached.
If we look beyond the economics of this deal, how important is it for India and for the European Union geopolitically?
Trade deals in this day and age are never just about trade. They're also about politics. Particularly for the European Union and India, the last 5 years have really been about dealing with competition from China, Chinese industry, and reducing dependencies on China for critical inputs. But also with President Donald Trump taking office for the second time, we've seen the United States imposing tariffs on friends and foes alike. So in this world where the transatlantic partnership is fractured, Europe and India need each other like never before because they both need trusted and reliable partners.
We know that India's continuing purchases of Russian oil have been a thorn in the side for the European Union when you consider that that money is going to fund Russia and its war in Ukraine. Can the EU, can it pull India away from Russia with this trade deal?
I think the framing of the trade deal through the Russia lens is flawed because India-Russia ties have a historic basis. They are long-standing, but they are also rather limited. India's purchase of Russian oil has already started going down. And when it comes to trade and investment, the EU has always been India's more important partner. As I just mentioned, it is India's largest trading partner and a fairly large export market for India. The trade deal should be seen, as the EU Trade Commissioner Šefčovič just said, through the lens of competition with China and the uncertainties generated by the United States. I think Russia does not figure in this conversation. Both Europe and India have established a certain level of trust, particularly when it comes to Moscow and Delhi's relationship with the latter.
Garima, let me ask you this before we run out of time. Could this deal have taken shape without U.S. President Donald Trump and his repeated imposition of tariffs? I mean, did he really give, the kick in the rear to get this deal done?
That's an interesting question, one we've also been asking ourselves. To give you some background, the trade deal negotiations started in earnest end of 2021-22. We've really seen momentum build in Europe-India ties independently of what was happening in the United States. But it is indeed tailwinds have been provided by President Trump and his imposition of tariffs. India is currently dealing with 50% tariffs, one of the highest in the world. So, of course, there's been an impetus on both sides and an added push, shall we say, provided by the United States that has led to the culmination of this deal.
Garima Mohan with the German Marshall Fund. Garima, we appreciate your time and your insights tonight. Thank you.